From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Well, Mr. Andy Ellis, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks for having me, James.
I'm really excited to have you here. Let me get our names on the screen.
Ooh.
Those who don't know who Andy Ellis is, if you've been living under a rock for whatever reason, welcome.
I'm not sure why you came up now, but
I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, stay there. There's nothing good going on right now at all. But if you did come up from under your rock, first of all, Andy has one of the better leadership books out there called 1% Leadership. If you haven't gotten it, go get it now. He'll obviously get a plug in for the book. Andy's also the partner over at YL Ventures, but formerly he was the CSO over at Akamai, and a whole bunch of really large organizations. I don't want to start naming them, but I could, you were an advisor at Orca Security, you're a member of the board of trustees, you're a seed investors in a whole bunch of different companies, but you spent 20 years at Akamai. That's, a long time for anyone, anywhere. You don't hear those stories anymore.
Yeah, no, definitely. I never thought I would spend 20 years in one company coming into the workforce.
No, but now you're at YL Ventures, who, are a great venture capital company in our industry, have really helped kind of spring a lot of different companies that a lot of us rely on to help build resiliency in cybersecurity. But really today, I want to talk to you a little bit about, Andy, about the kind of journey you've taken. You've gone, you started off as an InfoSec, kind of worked your way all the way up to the CSO title.
Yep.
You've gone across, you're obviously very, very outspoken in our industry and in a very, very good way, to now you're on the venture capital side, right? At YL Venture, very unique journey to begin with. So how has your perspective on cybersecurity evolved now that you're on the other side of the table, now that you're on the selling side and maybe not the buying side?
Yeah, so it's fascinating because I think when you're on the buying side and the implementing side, like, good enough is fine.
Right.
Like, this is the dirty little secret of most CISOs, which is we don't solve problems all the way. We would solve them like 60, 70%, and then you got to go move on to the next problem. And hopefully you'll come back to this. Like, I'm in a Slack channel where there's a CISO who literally just said, we don't track vulnerability metrics anymore because finally we just patch everything. Like, we built the CI/CD system to do the patching, and I don't ever want to talk about vulnerability metrics anymore. And every CISO was like, oh my God, that's amazing, because so many are solving it 65%. And when you're on the founder side, you obviously want to be able to say, like, well, I'm better than 65%. I'm 80, I'm 85%. And when you're on the investor side, you've got to figure out who's got the product that will sell. Like, at the end of the day, like, you could solve this problem perfectly, but if you can't sell the product, that doesn't matter. Like, who's actually got the right go-to-market motion, the right product fit that they're going to actually convince people to buy the product, either because they're so much better than the incumbent or they're solving a problem that nobody else is solving. So it's a very different way to sort of approach it. I don't think it's different of thinking about security, but it's thinking about how you approach solutions.
Well, so that's very interesting, because when you think of, trying to look at solutions as CISO, my journey's opposite of everyone else's, right? I founded 2 companies, sold them, and then I kind of went into the CISO role because I wanted to kind of take some time away, right? And what do you think other CISOs need to understand about the startup ecosystem? Because I know it. Like, whenever I speak to a founder and he tells me, "Oh man, I haven't been home in 4 days," I go,
only 4 days?
Joy. Just 4 days, that's it. I mean,
That's
I remember 12, 15 days of sleeping in the office.
So I think these are 2 of the most stressful jobs that I could conceive of. And there's a reason why when I left being a CISO, I did not go found a company. I had some great ideas. I still do. But I did not want that stress, because it is similar in some ways, but different in another. The founder stress that is different is, first of all, founder stress is existential. They are responsible for the jobs of a whole bunch of people. And if the founder screws it up, a bunch of people are unemployed.
Right.
Like, if you're a CISO, you might not really grasp that a failure of your part could unemploy people. It can, but it's very different from, like, the buck actually stops here with the founder. Like, that's where you are. I know founders that they stress because they need to go get another funding round and they don't know where that money's going to come from. And if they can't solve that problem, in 8 months, they have to let go a whole bunch of people. And they're living with that every single day, that there's a 100% company that is living on their backs. As a CISO, you have no idea what that's like. Now, as a CISO, you have a completely different set of responsibilities, which is somebody else's mistake in your business, if you didn't catch it correctly and account for it, can have catastrophic issues that like hit the Wall Street Journal. Like a founder going out of business, that's never going to make the front page of the journal. But a bad security mistake, that can be pretty catastrophic to the planet. And that's, I think, what CISOs worry about, is they carry this weight of responsibility that they see nobody else carrying. The founder is carrying the weight of the responsibility that they own.
Well, the fact, like, again, it's the, I don't think there's a greater stress than being a founder, right? Like, there's a reason I went from a founder to a CISO, because
it's
on the stress scale, it's much slower.
Yep.
Right? Like, it is. You're right. It's existential. It's not only that, is, can my team deliver on time? Am I holding to the promises I made to my investors, my partners, our employees, our customers?
Mm-hmm.
A lot rests on your shoulder. I mean, I've bought from a lot of startups as a CISO, and I won't buy unless I speak to the founder. Like, I won't buy a product from a startup as a CISO unless I speak to the founder. Like, it's great. I can meet your salespeople, you commission them, all of that's nice and good. But until you and I sit on a call or face to face and have that, until I see that fire in your eye, like, I don't know that
they're not just bailing on you next month.
Right. Like, I need to look at you and know that you're in this, because I'm taking a risk by buying.
Yep.
Right. I'm taking a risk by hedging, by going on that. And I think that's one of the bigger like challenges for startups and CISOs. On one hand, you hear CISOs all the time. Like, you and I go to events, you see it. We talk about innovation. We want cutting edge innovation. At the same time, we see a startup, we go, whoa. And you and I are in the same Slack channels. So you'll see someone say, has anyone heard of this startup? This is what they're saying. What do you think? And I'm like, well, they're a startup. You're taking a risk.
Yeah. This is the thing that I think that some CISOs really get and some really don't, which is, if you need to be willing to take the risk to have cutting edge innovation. It's that simple. You're not balancing and saying, oh, I only want to take a little bit of risk. Like, no. If you want to do business with a startup, recognize that tomorrow that startup could get acquired. It could fail to get a funding round and go out of business. It could pivot and tell you, sorry, I'm building a completely different product set because you're the only one who wanted this. Those are all risks you're going to take. Oh, and they could have a data breach that, has a problem for you. That's actually much less of a problem now than it was, I think, 15 years ago.
Right.
Partly because none of them are actually building the stack to run their company. They're just, building on top of SaaS and cloud like everybody else. Arguably, the startups are more secure than you are at their core basic run their company. So you're taking less risk there, but you are still taking a business risk. Just accept that. And in exchange, you're getting access to somebody who is gambling with other people's money that this solution might work.
So that's, we're kind of talking about that from a CISO perspective. Let's go to an early stage founder who's got an idea. I speak to very, very young founders sometimes. So one of the things I do, not to pat myself on the back, but if you're an early founder, you're still ideating, or you're still trying to kind of do an idea, and you reach out to me on LinkedIn, and a special sweet spot if you're from Israel, then I'll probably give you an hour, right? Like, I'll give you an hour. Let's sit down, talk to me about your idea. How do you want to solve it? So forth. Let me kind of help you ideate it, right? What are you telling those founders about their product vision, kind of now that because you were a CISO, with how that product vision meets with real world business needs for a CISO?
So a lot will depend on the personality of the founder, with how you're going to tell them. But often what I'm going to tell them is to try to look at the actual problem, not what they think the problem is. Because most security problems are actually organizational problems that manifest themselves as technology problems. Let's take identity as sort of this classic space. Why is identity not solved? Because to me, like, identity is one of the 4 big ecosystems you worry about, which is cloud, SaaS, endpoint, and identity are basically your 4 major things right now to really focus on. And identity seems completely out of touch. Like, Nobody's got a good approach. The reason for that is that identity is not actually the real ecosystem problem. It's how your business is structured. Like, what are your organizations? What do the people do in your organization? Everything identity flows out of that. But we don't know what that is. So when I talk to somebody ideating in the identity space, I'm like, how are you going to deal with a reorg? And they'll sometimes look at me glassy-eyed, like, what are you talking about? Like, your entire identity solution tries to give people permissions or keep track of something. What do you do the day after a reorg? If you haven't thought through that problem, you're not prepared to tackle identity.
Yeah, I mean, kind of what you're talking about is the business process side of the house, which, you know, I've been saying this year that the year just started, but I kind of started ideating this last year and have actually been able to bring it to a fruition, to a talk. I've submitted to speak at a different few events, but I wrote my first article about it back in November to kind of see how it landed, and it landed really well, which is cybersecurity's biggest problem isn't tools, policies, or anything else. It's the fact that we've never aligned security to business processes.
Yep. Well, and that we've never figured out what our business processes are to even align to them.
Well, because we team up with the wrong people, right?
Yep.
The conversation for CISOs is primarily, and I'm sorry to say this, driven by a Gartner key like category, right? You talked about identity, and you know, one of the questions I had for you is identity. So we may skip to that here in just a sec, but you know, identity, non-human, human identity, API. Well, what's a non-human identity? Here's a new category right now. Right. As a CISO and as cybersecurity, go learn this new category that someone at Gartner came up with.
Right. And that they're going to rename next month too.
Right. Stop.
Right. It. Like we saw this in cloud, was that all of a sudden we had CSPM, and then, oh no, now it's CNAP. And everybody's like, what's the difference between a CNAP and a CSPM? And the answer appears to be, well, the CNAPs you pay more for.
Yep. Well, yeah. I mean, again, agree. We have an issue. We're not aligning security to business processes. And ideally, that's why, you know, kind of like the definition of doing something, of being crazy, is doing the same thing over and over again. Yes. Result, right? But that kind of goes to the whole thing of identity, right? You've been watching identity. Originally, it was kind of like Active Directory and some servers. Now it's become like APIs and machines and VMs and all these. Are we just complexing something that really should be simplified?
We are, but that's because we're tackling the problem in the middle. The simple place, and this is what I use every time somebody comes in and talks about identity. I'll basically use this anecdote. I say, let's take James, and James has a bunch of permissions on servers. Like James has root access on these 100 servers. Great. The normal identity problem is like, we give James these grants. We get like 7 people to approve the grants. When we want to make a change, 7 people have to approve the change. And like once a quarter, because our auditors mandate, we ship around to James' manager, like, here's the 100 grants that James has. Are these okay? And of course, your manager looks at this list along with the 1,000 lines they have for every other employee and says, yep, of course that's okay. I'm not going to waste any of my time figuring out if James has too many permissions. Right? That's the basic state of the art for identity management today. When the real thing is, James is a DevOps engineer who works in our platform team. All DevOps engineers can have root access on systems their team administers, and the platform team administers these 100 systems. That's the actual organizational conversation, is that, and that's simple. Now, once you have that, like, boom, giving you 100 grants isn't any work. We don't need to get 7 people's approval for it because we approved these 3 facts about the environment. And that scales. But then you have to get in the way of HR. Nobody wants to go talk to HR and say, hey, guess what? When you want to reorg the company, here's actually how we have to manage a reorg so that we can change all of the access rights correctly, and that we can deal with transitions, and how do we, like, there's a whole bunch of complex problems here that we just don't even try to solve because we started with too much complexity.
So I saw that firsthand in the energy sector. So, you know, I'm a CISO in the energy field now, and I went to a power plant back in December to get ready for a NERC audit. And
I'm sorry. Things I'm glad I never had to deal with.
I'm going to show you something. On Sunday, I'm getting ready to take my GSIP.
Mm-hmm.
right? Firsthand, sitting right here.
That looks like a manuscript in the middle of being edited.
It might be. I've never seen a manuscript before, but if you say it, I believe you, right? But it, we went in, and the power plant and the mothership had done a reorg, and the director of all controls for the entire utility had no way to get in and out of the power plant or the control room. So anytime we wanted to go into a room where you needed a key card, we had to get someone to do that. And that went on for 2 weeks.
Oh, because so classic.
Because there was no real way after they had done the reorg to get him the right rights. And he's filling out tickets. We're calling the help desk, and I'm standing next to him, and I've got grays here, which is why I keep my hair really short, because all of this is gray. And I was feeling the gray just grow more in the hair. And I'm like, no, stop it. I need the gray to go down. I need the gray to go down. Go away, not up, down, go down. But that, like, you're right about identity. What do you think is the future of identity security?
So honestly, I think what I would love to see, it's never going to happen, but I would actually love to see like HiBob, or Workday, or any of those any of those competitors basically say, we're going to get into the identity security space. Like, we are the master source of like what organizational truths are, and we're going to be the place where identity starts. And it will go from us to your IDP, which it does today, but just for names. But I actually want like much more coherent, like, what are job descriptions? Like, HR should have this anyway, but it's so disjoint. Like, that's honestly where I would love to see it. Is it going to go there? No. So what I do hope for is to see an IGA that wants to sit in that space and say, we'll actually be the broker between everybody who's the source of business truth and then your IDP. And we'll also do stupid stuff like access reviews, but we'll make them work. And then over time,
we'll do effective access reviews.
Do effective access. Because here's the way you should do access reviews is you should say, oh, look, James just came on. Great. We need to give him this access because it matches somebody else's. Hey, we just want to confirm that Andy is still a DevOps engineer. Is he? When you check the box, yes. You're like, great. I don't have to do an access review for Andy until the following quarter because we just did one. Like, do these in piecemeal every time somebody's touching it to say, hey, is this fact still true? Like, the CISO should be the one who just signs off on, DevOps engineers have root access to production. That's okay. Yes. Great. Now, if somebody else approves the DevOps and who owns what system, you don't try to do the sort of the complex, we've expanded out the multiplicative universe of these truths. Make it simple, and then it's easy to be like, why does James have root access to a finance system? Because he's not in finance. Like, let's have that conversation, whereas today that would just get buried in the noise.
A lot of stuff is buried in the noise today, which is why I see now a new trend of insider threats, right? And they're like malicious or non-malicious insider threats. And I was like, is that an issue with identity management or disloyal and just bad employees? And I'm going to go with the first rather than the latter.
It is the first. And the way you should think about insider threats, and I find that Microsoft has been really helpful for me thinking about this when they wrote the guidelines for inclusive design, which has nothing to do with security. But it basically says, like, if you wanted to design for a one-armed person any piece of technology, you would never do it. Because the number of people who are permanently one-armed is like 100,000 on the planet. Like, it's a tiny, tiny pool. But the number of people who are temporarily one-armed, like my dad who just had shoulder surgery, so he's got an arm he can't use, but only for like 6 weeks. Like, that's a much bigger pool. The people who are situationally one-armed, they're carrying a kid or groceries or whatever. Like, every day, half the planet is one-armed at some point. So you design for one-armed people because you have situationally one-armed. Insiders are the same way. The number of people who are truly malicious insiders, vanishingly small. And I say that as one of the few people who had to deal with economic espionage inside their company. Like, actual malicious insider, yeah, I had to deal with one. Still vanishingly small. Not going to change my opinion of the world. But the insider who's trying to get their job done and is trying to work around security because it's in the way, who is temporarily hostile because they're pissed off at me now, like that I've got to worry about. Or the person whose computer just got compromised. And so it's not them. We need to remember that identity is not about a person, it's about a computer. We almost never authenticate a human. We authenticate the computer that is attached to the human.
And we're hoping that the human is one there. You're talking about the human kind of side of this, and let's for a second switch to the human element in cyber, right? You see the kind of, you see the kind of role that human element plays around, human awareness or being a good boss or being a good leader and being, the empathy and being able to understand it, entering into, obviously a new year. And I think, for me personally, I think 2025 is going to be the year of reckoning for cyber.
Okay.
I feel like we've reached a point where when I'm looking at the entire landscape, none of the graphs around cybercrime or losses have gone down. So there's a point of reckoning coming, and it's true, because also I'm hearing it from the incoming National Security Advisor Mike Walls, where he's talking about cybersecurity and space in the same sentence, and talking about the focus of the national cyber of the national security strategy to be around prioritizing cyber and space rather than old stuff for days. Right. So I kind of feel like there's a reckoning coming. Like I can smell it when you start to, when over the weekend, right, the first weekend of January, where every single major publication in the country, from the Times to the Post to Wall Street Journal to USA Today to every major publication, had a whole story around the telco breach on Salt Typhoon, the Chinese cyber activity, you do realize a reckoning is coming, and there's a preparation happening to something taking place. So now that I've kind of given that preamble, let's talk a little bit about that human element, because I think the human element is going to be critical to it, right? So when we look at kind of like the human element in cyber, are you going to start to see startups more addressing the human element in their products from the very beginning? Or do you still see us kind of addressing the problem from the middle?
So I hope so, but not in the way you think, because I do not think that the human is the problem, but I think that we need to be informed about safety by looking at humans. The problem is we build unsafe systems. As long as we build unsafe systems, then we can blame it on the human, because the human used the system in a way that was dangerous, or they did a thing they never should have done, and that had a bad outcome. The real problem is we are not designing safe systems. And so as a result, like the humans do things, sometimes they use our system improperly, sometimes they use it properly, whatever it's going to be. And we like to blame the human. Like one of my favorite people, Nancy Levison, who is a professor at MIT, who talks about system safety a lot. She wrote one of my favorite books, which is right over my head, Engineering a Safer World. She says that human error is a symptom of a system in need of redesign. That the only way that a human should be able to crash a plane is if they wanted to crash the plane. And right now, that's not where we are. Like, correct. We are being breached, not because our humans wanted us to be breached, but because we made it impossible for them to keep us from being breached. The human is not the problem. It's the system.
Very 100% agree with you. I've never been able to articulate it as well as you just have. Like, that was beautiful articulation.
I mostly stole it from Nancy, so I'll give her
credit. Well, I think that was a beautiful articulation of what the issue is with cyber, is that we're obviously, focused on the systems. But when you talk about systems, right, CISOs today, we're dealing with nation state threats. On the energy side, that's primarily what I deal with, is nation state disruptions to reliability and safety. On the healthcare side, you've got ransomware threats that can paralyze a hospital. We've obviously seen this year, last year, 2024, obviously changed healthcare, what happened there, and obviously the subsequent physical attack on the CEO of United Healthcare, in
is
Manhattan.
Deplorable. I just want to make very clear that if you're
100%
celebrating
deplorable.
that, you should reevaluate your humanity.
What are your morals and principles to life, right? To supply chain risks that we see continue to increase, right? Obviously now security vendors with, I don't want to name victims of crime, but we've also seen security vendors now become vectors. And I think in the CISA catalog for 2024, I did a basic search for an article I'm writing for the first week of February, but I think security vendors accounted for more zero-day threats to companies than any other software.
I totally believe it.
Right? So what critical strategies coming from a CISO, former CISO to now a venture partner, should we focus on as practitioners to build resiliency rather than just the basic, perimeter or network defenses?
Yep. So I love saying zero trust because I actually mean it, not just because it's a buzzword. I think the whole zero trust movement got it wrong.
Okay.
ZTNA, great first step, like as somebody who built a ZTNA product, the first one out there, like it and beyond, Akamai's EAA and Google's Beyond Corp are sort of the best things out there. But the problem is that too many people have focused on, I don't want to trust the user. That to them, zero trust is do not trust your users. We need to extend it and say zero trust should be no system should trust any other system more than it needs to. Why do people get ransomware outbreaks? Oh, because you have flat Active Directory and like breach the domain admin and now you own all of the computers. Get rid of that. Like that's the problem, is when people can laterally move and take over a machine. We want to talk about endpoint resilience. I want endpoints that no remote admin has control over it. Whether you're buying a Chromebook or a Windows machine or a Mac, your machine should basically take off the shelf, like here's the update from the vendor. And ideally one security thing that basically locks the machine down from the outside. And no, you don't get to push commands to that machine without user intervention. You want to stop ransomware, that's how you do it. Like do not have remote admin on machines and eliminate passwords. And 99% of the ransomware threats can't hit you.
Agreed. But then comes the, you and I both work with startups a lot.
Yep.
Fair. I was a founder, and I remember, my company was in fintech.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we looked at security and obviously we championed security because we understood the compliance and the buyer side were demanding it in the product. But I look at other companies, startups today that are not in the cyberspace, right? If we go to, healthcare or IoT and so forth, security is an afterthought. Like a CISO or any sort of security engineer could be a 30-person, like after you've hired 30 people, 40 people in the company, it's never in the top 10. Rarely ever is a security person in the top 10, even for some security companies.
It shouldn't be.
Okay.
I actually don't think it should be in your top 10, especially not now. I do think that your CTO should be tagged with it. Like you have a CTO founder, somebody needs to sit down with the CTO and say, you are the CISO of the company until we hire one.
Interesting.
Like,
so is that kind of like your philosophy now as a partner at YL? Is that kind of how you look at it?
And that's how I think about it, because that's who ends up having to deal with the compliance of, we have to go be, get a SOC 2 within the first year, which I'm always just entertained by. I'm like, what do you have to SOC 2? But it's a helpful way for them to start. But the reality is, like, CISOs exist because the business doesn't do the security job, right? The original CISOs were the CIO didn't do the job. CIO is trying to cut costs, only supports the bare minimum. And then somebody gets this great idea to put up an e-commerce website 20 years ago, I guess maybe close to 25 years ago now. And like somebody said, we should make sure that machine doesn't get compromised. That person became a CISO. Like they may not have had the title for 10 years, but at some point that's your CISO, not because the business said, security should be its own thing, but because nobody did security. So the goal today should be, how do you do security from day one? The CTO is thinking about security, general counsel is thinking about security in their domain, so that you can buy yourself the time to like bring in a director of information security who's going to sort of run your help desk and run a bunch of your operational processes, and they can mature into being a CISO. But if you're a Series C company or earlier and you have a CISO, I really want to question where you're spending your money.
Wow. So you're saying Series C?
Yeah, Series
or
C. Especially if you got a unicorn round in Series C, you should start to think about it. You're probably going to want somebody who's on the marketing side as well. Like that's where you think about having a CISO. But if you're a Series B or earlier and you have a CISO, like where are you finding the money to do that? Because that's money you're not putting in a seller.
Very interesting. So you look at kind of like the hires being engineering and sales in seed A and B.
Yeah. You have
sales,
a product,
marketing, engineering.
Yeah,
and
your
then
job is to
start
build a
a trust.
go-to-market engine, not to build a long-term company yet. Series C is where you're building a long-term company. Like,
Very
so
interesting.
Your seed round is, do I have a product anybody will use?
And pay for.
And a few people will pay for it. Like, you get to $1 million in revenue, that's like hitting it out of the park for most seed companies. So you don't need a lot, but you need enough people that you can sell it. But it's, as you said, founder-led sales. Like, everybody's buying from the founder if it's a seed round.
Right.
Once you hit A, now is, can you send somebody who's not the founder out to sell this product? And can you repeatedly sell the same product over and over and over again using the same collateral? You don't have to iterate on every sales transaction. And then Series B is where, as your product has gained maturity, now do you have a factory for producing sales reps? Can you get 80% of your reps at 80% attainment? Like, do you have this repeatable engine where you can bring a rep in 6 months later, they're 80% productive and they're out selling? And can you keep doing that? Because if you have that engine, you're going to get funding.
Interesting. That's I've spoken to a lot of venture capital people. I haven't heard that kind of like breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
I like that breakdown. I think it's 100% true, right? If you know, not everyone sells in a year or two.
Yep.
Rarely will you get acquired in a year or two. I mean, the last few years, I'd say the last 3 years of the market, or 4 years, you could say, from like mid 2020 to last.
They are very unusual years. Like, we're trying
Very
to figure out
unusual
what does 2025 look like in the venture world. I don't think anybody knows. We're all optimistic, but at the end of the day, like, this is how you get from step to step. And if you're a CISO, like 90% of what a CISO does is think about 5 years in the future.
Right.
Like, only 10% is actually solving today's problems, because that's what you have a team for. If you're 90% solving today's problems, you're not yet a CISO. That's okay, even if you have the title, but recognize that you're still tactically a security operations team. But that's okay. If you only have funding for 10 months, even if you added the 12 months for another round of funding after that, or 18 months, like that's 28 months, that's still not the 60-month lifespan a CISO needs to think in. And you shouldn't be thinking out past the end of your runway, because nobody else in the business is.
That's interesting. So it kind of takes me back to your book, right?
Yep.
So in 1% leadership, you're constantly talking about that 1%, those small little changes of how you transform things. How do CISOs, how do founders apply those concepts of small little changes? Because a lot of times, let's be honest, we don't have it. You just talked about a small runway for a founder.
Yep.
And as a CISO, the average tenure of a CISO is 18 months,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like maybe 20 months now, maybe. But then you and I both know great CISOs that have been looking for work now for 8-12 months. The market's just not
The market
there.
is very weird and very bifurcated. Like, there's the companies who want the unicorn CISOs and can pay for them, and there's the companies who want the unicorn CISOs and are unwilling to pay for them. And that basically seems to be most of the market.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about that kind of 1% increment sometimes, where, what do you say when you don't have that runway? How do you still implement kind of that 1% leadership and still get the progress you want, maybe in a shorter time frame than, you know, because when people think of 1%, they think like, I need 100 months.
Right. That's the big challenge, is people bite off this whole project and they say, well, I have to do all of these things and I get successful when the last step happens. Those are always doomed. It's almost impossible to do a multi-year project that shows no value until it's done. And so get that out of your head. Instead, flip it and say, what is the thing I could do in the next month that produces some value, so that people will look around and say, oh, hey, that's good. Let me keep that person around. You just lengthened your tenure by a month. And if you do it right, it's a bunch of these things that will be incremental, that each one looks like it's a standalone, but at the end of the day, it builds this program. Like, when I look at the Zero Trust program we built at Akamai, it had 10 key steps along the way. We didn't tell people that there were 10 steps and this was all one program. This was just, how do we harden our corporate infrastructure? That's what we called it. So hardening the corporate infrastructure was like, oh, here's a bunch of unrelated projects that at the end of it produced this amazing thing. Had we tried to sell people the amazing thing, we never would have gotten buy-in. But when we said, hey, we want to solve the problem of a flat Active Directory infrastructure and go to multi-tiered, and we're going to let the domain admins design it. Like, we didn't tell them how to do it. We told them that we would buy them the space to get it done. They did. It was fantastic. We gave them a little input. We implemented 802.1x on our wired network. Not one of the better moves. We ended up throwing that out. But as a result, we had a key provisioning infrastructure to put X509 certs on every device. And so at the end of this, where now I've got X509 certs on every device, I've got multi-factor authentication with push to a phone. We implemented what we called Akamai on Akamai, which was every one of our websites ran through our own CDN. And so each of these combined, and I had single sign-on, I put them all together, and now I've got the world-class ZTNA. I couldn't have sold the world-class ZTNA in 2009.
But small little incremental changes.
Yeah.
It's sometimes I feel like even one of my personal failures is you do kind of want to hit home run, right? There's nothing, you and I both enjoy baseball, I think. So, there's nothing fancy about it.
I'm in Boston. I don't enjoy baseball anymore.
I mean, there's nothing, you rarely see good base hits unless your base hits bring someone home. No one's watching your base hit, right? Home runs is what almost everyone aims for. And I think I blame that on a few things. One, I think we're in this instant gratification where I want to hit home runs at my first at bat and be able to celebrate it on LinkedIn by saying, hey, everyone, look how awesome I hit a home run.
Yep.
And then I get, 2,000 people liking it. And I go, oh, I'm like this influencer and this really important person now, which I think is failing more people than succeeding.
Right. Because you don't realize that your influencer hit like 50 base hits before they got the only home run you saw.
Right. You're missing everything. You're just catching that grand slam or that big home run that smashed out of the ballpark.
In fact, I'll give you a great example, and this is advice I give to every startup. I say, when you walk into an enterprise and you could solve 50 problems for them, they've got like 50 systems that you could apply this to. Go find the most unimportant system, and that should be the one you do your proof of concept on. And they're all like, why? It should be on the flagship, the most important one. I'm like, do you know how hard it is to get people to sign off on you making any changes to a mission critical application? Impossible. You're going to be like 2 years fighting, whereas go find some unimportant app that somebody cares about, but they like you. And we're going to turn it on here and prove that we don't break anything. You're not even trying to prove that you solve problems. You're just trying to prove you didn't break something. That's a base hit as a vendor, is prove that this integration is viable. Then you prove that the technology is viable.
Yeah, I completely agree. So now that you're in this partner role and you're looking and you're obviously speaking with CISOs, you're speaking to founders, you're ideating,
yep,
kind of seeing the outline of the industry as a whole, looking at kind of, cybersecurity from your point of view, what are some things that you think everyone should watch for from a CISO point of view in 2025 and then a founder point of view for 2025? What are some things on your radar?
So I think everybody's talking about AI right now. And I will tell you, 50% of my ideation calls are mention AI usually in the first 30 seconds. And I think that you have to understand how technology works and doesn't work. So I think we're going to see a lot of people use AI to try to solve problems. I think we're going to see some really epic failures out of that.
Agreed.
And so here's my bullshit detector. I'm sorry if I'm too explicit for your podcast. But,
you're fine.
For AI, which is, I think of AI in three very fundamentally different categories, which is analysis, think machine learning. Like, oh, you have a very large data set. I want to figure out what this data set means. It is automation. I have this problem. I know what to do, but I want to make sure it gets done. So maybe you call it orchestration. And it's generation. Given some prompt, give me some suggestions. And what we've seen in the last year and a half is that, wow, generation got really good at producing things that are sort of human quality. I think of them as consultant quality. Like, if you hire a consultant to come in and write a report for you, you will get a report that's amazingly written. It might not bear any resemblance to reality because
I call it the big four.
I wasn't going to name them, but yes,
that's I know you don't have to. I can.
Right. And so that's the problem. And so if you think about applying AI to a problem space, what you want to hear is that somebody understands each of these three. Because what I often hear is somebody who says, well, I'm going to build an LLM that will patch all your machines for you. And I'm like, really, because orchestration is not an LLM problem and machine patching is an orchestration problem that is compounded by the fact that I have an organizational problem that nobody trusts me to patch the system, so they're not going to let me do it. They're just not going to let me do it faster if I try to throw AI at it. So that's, to me, that's your bullshit detector. If somebody comes in and walks in about AI, ask them about orchestration and automation, ask them about analytics or machine learning, and then ask them about generation and how are they moving between them in their technology. Otherwise, they're just AI washing. What a lot of people are doing is they're saying, oh, well, I pulled up the CVE and then I use an LLM to generate remediation instructions for you, which is really just I take the remediation instructions that were written badly by a developer who doesn't understand the English language. And I say that about Americans too. This is not about what your native language is.
Completely
Most developers
understood.
cannot write English.
Well, developers can't write something that someone who's a non-developer understand.
Right. And so, but an LLM is really good at taking that, rewriting it into a fashion your operators can understand. And what you should do is say, well, I have them generate it, but then I have a human validate it. And then once it is, now it's scale, boom, everybody go patch this.
Yeah. I mean, so I appreciate that. That's interesting when you look at AI from that perspective. Let's look at it from a CISO perspective at 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's going to be a shift in the cybersecurity paradigm from a practitioner perspective, specifically around maybe the role of the CISO, given, the SEC reporting, kind of some of the new regulations, maybe the role of CISA evolving, because we don't know how, incoming Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, or the Trump administration's really looking at CISA. They haven't appointed anyone to kind of replace Jen Easterly yet. There's a lot of uncertainty in industry around that.
So I have I don't know. Okay, I'm going to go with my really hot takes here. I think the SEC has been a disaster. I think going after Tim Brown was unconscionable, and whoever in the SEC made that decision should be fired. Boom. I'm going to say that. Tim Brown was not an officer of the company at the time. He did the things that they alleged that he did that led to fraud. You want to put the officers on trial? Go for it. But Tim Brown, you should not be going after. This is the reason more than anything else that you are seeing CISOs retire and not take another CISO gig. They're like, I'm just done with the stress. I got my money. I don't need this. CISA, I think, does amazing work, but I think Jen Easterly politicized CISA really hard, and that's going to be a problem going forward. Like CISA, you remember, was funded by the Trump administration last time around.
Correct. And then Chris Krebs politicized it at the very beginning, and then Jen Easterly added to it.
Jen Easterly continued it. They got involved in the misinformation game. Here's a hint for anybody listening who works in the government. The words misinformation and disinformation should never, ever come out of your mouth because you're inherently not trustworthy to say those words.
Correct.
Misinformation and disinformation are tools of the government, not of the people not in government. So as soon as you say them, I don't trust you. And I think that's CISA's problem, is they were tainted by this small piece of what they did, but very loud piece around, we want to deal with misinformation in our elections, which ended up being censorship.
And then the Disinformation Council,
right? Even
back in 2021 and 2022,
stepped back from that and said, oh my God, like all the stuff that we did was censorship. Like, this is the evaluation people are going to need to make. I really hope that CISA survives this. I worry that the people in CISA are going to make it a bigger problem than it ought to be. That said, what should the CISO be thinking about? Do your job. A lot of these problems are big headline issues, often because somebody made a big mistake. Like Tim Brown's mistake was working for a company that didn't care about security and being willing to sort of help them frame those words. Now, a lot of people hear that and say, well, my company doesn't care about security. The reality is nobody's as bad as SolarWinds was before their breach.
Right. I mean, I would say one thing to that fact is, if you still have Ivanti and you haven't taken a sledgehammer to it at this point, you glute for punishment, right? Like that's one thing the security. At one point you got to take the old dog out back and just shoot it. I think Ivanti's there. I'm sorry to say it. I don't want to see people lose their jobs. Mm-hmm. That's not. I'm not saying it out of. It
sounds like a Kristi Noem solution to the problem.
It might be. She might take the old dog out because I think 80% of their income is from the federal government. Yeah. So I mean, she might take the old dog back and shoot it. That is the South Dakota way of doing it.
It is.
But And by the way, one thing I will say is, as security practitioners, we do have to start addressing the business process, right?
Yep.
We got to stop thinking about the problem from a Gartner report or a Forrester or whatever else analyst out there. Those are all great. They're good. They're indicators. They kind of let you know. But like you said, it's your 5-year plan.
Right.
Focus on your business process. Understand a critical business process in the company from A to Z. Identify the risks. Start patching those up. That shows immediate value. That's your 1% incremental base runs.
In fact, here's my advice that I give to every new CISO. And it's like I have a first 91 day guide. If you go Google literally CISO 91 days, you'll get it.
Yeah.
In which I say, go talk to all your stakeholders and ask them 2 questions. The questions are, what is the stupidest security thing we're doing that we should get rid of? And what is the easiest thing we could do that you don't know why we're not doing it? You ask people those 2 questions, you have just built your 90-day roadmap for success.
Yeah, I haven't asked those questions directly in that manner. I typically say, what is it about security that is hindering your ability to be able to do business the way you want to do it? And then try to understand it and just listen. And by the way, shut up and listen.
Yeah, shut
when
up and listen.
Ask the question, shut up and listen. Don't defend your predecessor. Don't defend the action. Right. Just shut up and listen.
Yeah, I like what your question from a long-term relationship building, but they're gonna pull in strategic problems that are sticky and thorny.
Yep.
You want to ask them, like, what's the stupid thing? Like, I did this. I was consulting for a startup just to help them review their security posture, and they had implemented single sign-on, but you had to sign on 8 times every morning. So it wasn't really single sign-on, and like, the problem was they'd gotten like mostly done. They hadn't finished. There were some things. And as soon as this was brought up, like, one of the people mentions it to me, the person that the head of security reports to tells me, I go tell the head of security, they have this fixed within a month. Like, why could you not have that conversation? Because nobody asks the question in a way that's like, tell me the stupid thing that annoys you.
Yeah. Welcome to the challenge there. Andy, thank you so much for coming on, buddy.
Thanks for having me, James.
This has been amazing. For everyone watching, go follow Andy at CSO Andy. Really a lot of good nuggets. And then you've got your newsletter on LinkedIn, right? Do One, which is also great to follow with some really good tips. And then obviously YL Ventures. You guys just dropped the 2024 report on the state of the Israeli ecosystem.
Cyber Nation.
Yeah, I covered it on the podcast this week, which was great.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a good report to kind of see the consolidation as the consolidation happened in Israel, yet innovation continued. Yeah. Right. The consolidation didn't essentially shrink the ecosystem. It did kind of
right. And what's interesting is this is the first time we're really seeing Israeli companies buying Israeli companies. Usually it's American companies buying Israeli companies.
Oh, Israeli press love that.
Yeah, no, now we're starting to see that. We did see more seed rounds and more C rounds. We did not see a growth in the A and B rounds last year. So we're really looking forward to seeing that this year. I'm really looking forward. I have a bunch of seed companies who would like their A rounds now. But that's
do you call that the whiz? Is that the whiz effect?
The
lack of A and B?
No, because I think it was an economic effect. I don't think it had anything to do with whiz, and had everything to do with, like, there's an economic downturn. Investors got really careful about their money. There were a lot of, when we look at a couple of the big global funds that sort of exited and had to write down their portfolios in 2020 and 2021, that made a lot of the mid-range investors who normally do the A and B rounds a lot more skittish. We had seen this huge influx of money that was from non-security investors in 2018 to 2020. That money pulled back. All the people who were in there also pulled back. You've got the war, although the people are innovating through the war. Just to be very clear, the founders are amazing, but it does make everybody a little slower, a little more skittish at bringing money into the ecosystem. So it wasn't a complete awful, but it was a very dry and barren period.
Yeah, the end of 2023 going into 2024 were very, very obviously challenging, and you and I have spoken about this offline extensively. Is the fact is that what Israel showed, what Israeli startups showed, is you can have half of your team go to reserve duty and somehow still meet all your obligations. I think very few companies in the tech sector folded
Yeah, no, it was very, very rare, like amazing. And the stories that some of these people will tell, or the experiences, I was in Tel Aviv and meeting with a company, and, one of the founders brings his rifle into the meeting because he's on reserve duty and he might get called up any minute. And in fact, that day he did. So like we're done with our meeting, I leave, and then I find out he just headed north, to the Lebanese border, got halfway there and got told, no, we don't need you today. Drove back and was back at work the next day.
And for those who don't know, in the IDF, if you're issued a weapon, the weapon has to be on you at all times, no matter where you are, right? That's why if you ever go to Israel in the summer on a Saturday, and you'll see a bunch of 18, 19-year-old girls in a bikini with a rifle.
Yeah, well, if you're on active duty, if you're on reserves, there's usually more, like, it doesn't have to be on you, but because they're actually calling up the people that everybody's like, I don't want to have to go get my rifle from my car or wherever. Like,
because the response time is just so, like, the response time is critical, right?
Yep.
We learned that on October 7th. People had to go and get weapons weren't easily accessible, especially in the places around the Gaza Strip, right, where no one could have weapons in their houses. There were rules that they all had to be in the center of the kibbutz or the yeshuv.
Right. And I think we'll see a big change in the Israeli society as a result of that.
Correct. Yeah, there's now more civilians with weapons, and the fact is that most terror attacks that have taken place since October 7th inside of Israel, whether it's stabbing or shooting, the people who typically neutralize the terrorists perpetrating it are armed civilians,
or an armed civilian, or a reservist,
or a reservist, that's armed on their way.
They're right there. Like,
yep. Absolutely. This has been great. Thank you, Andy, again so much. Go check out Andy. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope this was as valuable to you as it has been for me. Go check out Andy's book. I'll put the link for the book on Amazon in the show notes, so you can go get it there. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend, and stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.